get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Welcome to In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman, and this is the May is the whole month. Yesterday was Star Wars Day, or May the 4th be with you, and that, of course, makes today Revenge of the 5th. So needed to get all the Star Wars puns out of the way because at Red Hat, yes, we do celebrate Star Wars Day. We all bring our whole selves there, and I've been wearing lots of Star Wars gear all week, but it is also a very special week this week at Red Hat because it is RHEL week, which is Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I'm sure anybody watching this knows. And tomorrow actually is the 20th anniversary of RHEL. So to help us celebrate that and talk about all that's new and what's been going on with the development of RHEL 9, really happy to welcome to the program Gunnar Hellekson, who's the Vice President and General Manager for Linux here at Red Hat. Gunnar, thanks so much for joining us and happy RHEL week.
Hey, happy RHEL week. It's like Christmas, Easter, all rolled into one.
Yeah. So, boy, I mean, Gunnar, it's funny. So, you know, you haven't quite been at Red Hat for 20 years. I've only been at Red Hat for a year and a half. But I remember when, you know, it's funny. It was, you know, RAS 2.1 came out of it, which eventually turned into RHEL 20 years ago. I was working for a large storage company. You know, we needed enterprise workloads in production. And oh my gosh, the Linux 2.4 kernel, what a mess. We had pages of patches that customers needed to use to be able to support it. We only had a very small team of engineers that was doing that testing. And when Red Hat kind of separated itself from the pack and said, here's an offering that can work, you know, I, as like a product and program manager, told our field, like, hey, this is the default for what you will use. You know, of course, you know, here we are 20 years later where Linux is. So, you know, take a second, step back, you know, where we came from. And boy, you know, a lot has changed in 20 years.
Yeah, it has. If you think about well, and it's not just RHEL that's changed, right? It's the entire Linux landscape has changed. We went from being kind of rough upstarts, right? Everybody recompiling their own 2.4 kernel. I know that's what I did, right? And now Linux is like water. It is everywhere. It's powering everything. I'm looking at my desk here. It's in at least 6 devices on my desk. It's been an amazing journey for the whole Linux community. And then of course for Red Hat Enterprise Linux as well. Yeah. Really
no, Gunnar, you're so right. You know, one of the things I used to say as an analyst, if it wasn't for Linux, we probably wouldn't have the cloud. And maybe people have said, Stu, we probably wouldn't have the internet of today if it wasn't for Linux. We don't need to think about it. When I do, you know, a search on, you know, the web, or if I buy a product on the web, I don't think about the fact that there's Linux underneath that. So let's talk about RHEL itself, though. So, you know, a lot has changed. You talk from the self-compiling kernel to, you know, how many people at Red Hat here have, you know, a shrink wrap box behind them to talk about the first deployment that they did of, you know, RHEL and, you know, Red Hat Linux before that to today, the development of what you've been doing in RHEL 9 is a little bit different than what we'd seen in the past.
Yeah, that's right. So excuse me, RHEL 9 will be the first release that we have done using the CentOS stream mechanism. So actually, I should do a history lesson, right? That's how we started. Okay. So you mentioned we split Red Hat, when we split Red Hat Linux into Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We did that in order to basically keep kind of a separation of concerns. We needed a place to go do kind of disruptive, innovative, risk-taking, and then we needed a place, you know, to do I think they like to call it the bleeding edge work, right? And then we needed a place where we could do the hardening and the stability and create something that somebody could use in a mission-critical enterprise context. Okay, so now we got Fedora over here, and we got Red Hat Enterprise Linux over here. This served us extremely well for a very long time. So recently we made a change, though. We added a intermediate step because what we found, especially with things moving so quickly, we needed a good way of better collaborating with our partners, who they needed early access to what we were doing, but couldn't wait until we had fully productized it, and so they needed a middle step. And so that's why we introduced CentOS Stream. And so now the code kind of starts from the upstream communities, tens of thousands of them, flows into Fedora. From Fedora, it flows into CentOS Stream. From CentOS Stream, it flows into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so RHEL 9 is the first release that has fully gone through that cascading process, and it worked, and which I'm delighted about, as this is kind of a risk for us, and it certainly appears to have paid off.
Yeah. So that development almost a little bit more in the open, because it's always been open source and what's done, but that relationship with the community has changed a little. One of the other things, Gunnar, I remember back, I believe it was 3 years ago when RHEL 8 came out. One of the questions everybody always had is, what's a minor release? What's a major release? When do things come out? And we've reached a certain maturity level where there's a cadence going on. So tell us what that means when it comes to RHEL.
So partially due to the process that I just talked about, when you release an operating system, you don't get to release it whenever you want, because the hardware system has two jobs, right? Is to enable the hardware underneath, and then you have to make sure that you're providing stability for the applications that live on top. So if you're shipping an operating system, you have to be thoughtful about when you're shipping it, especially when you have a lifecycle commitment like RHEL does. So when we ship, it's going to be like that for the next 10, 13 years. And so often what we would do when we were trying to figure out when to ship the next version of RHEL is we would look at all the hardware schedules and try and find exactly the right moment when it was just before this happened and just after this happened, and get it right in the sweet spot there. And then that's how we chose the GA date. Okay. That worked when the world of hardware was significantly more predictable than it is today. And so we realized with the release of RHEL 8 that if we were able to provide a certain amount of predictability, if people could plan ahead on when the next major version of RHEL was going to happen, it would make planning your acquisitions, your upgrades, it would make that significantly easier. And so we made a promise with RHEL 8 that we were going to ship a new major release every 3 years, and then the minor releases, the 8.1s, 8.2s, 8.3s, those would come out every 6 months. And so knock wood, we've been able to deliver on the promise so far. So like clockwork, every 6 months we come out with a new minor release, and then with 9 we are going to, fingers crossed, we're going to be able to ship on time 3 years after the release of RHEL 8.
Okay, cool. So if you saw right on screen there, we had a question, of course, when you talk about all that, and says, RHEL 9. So, 3 years from when RHEL 8 is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Just like we promised. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Awesome. Great. Thank you. And good to see people in the chat. Eric, the IT guy who does one of the Red Hat Lime streams, is there. I know he's been doing a lot of the internal activity for RHEL Week this time. And I love what you talked about, Gunnar, because when the kind of competing challenges that enterprises face and where Red Hat sits right in the middle is, number one is there's that constant change. There's so much coming on. I remember seeing it's like, what's it, a million lines of code change every month in the Linux piece. And on the other hand, the enterprise says like, hey, I can't change this every month, every quarter. Sometimes I can't even change it every year. So how do you keep me up, get my security patches, yet allow me to have longer life cycles? And of course, that's what Red Hat's been doing with all of our software product for a long time. That's what we do over in the OpenShift team, following, many of the things that the RHEL team set the foundation for us. Yeah. Talking about that complexity and what's out there, one of the driving factors in IT is, we need things to be simpler. I always joke when we go to the cloud, the promise of the cloud is it's going to be cheap and simple. And when we actually get there, it's really neither of those things. So maybe tell us what's happening with RHEL along the simplification axis. Yeah.
So if you think about, I'll answer it this way. I like to think about RHEL having kind of 3 different kinds of customers, right? So the first set of customers is those hardware providers that I was talking about, and they need to be able to have as you mentioned, like have a stable kernel that they can work against, and they need a stable kernel that they can write drivers for, right? And so being able to, and I feel like that's we've done a pretty good job at that over the last 20 years. We made that pretty simple for folks. For people writing applications, that's the second kind of audience for the operating system. For people writing the applications, we provide a stability. Internally, we call it the ABI, or the binary interface, right? So we have a stable ABI, and with RHEL, we commit that when we do a new major version, that major version's ABI will be stable throughout the lifetime. So if you've written an application for RHEL 8.1, it's going to continue working all the way through the 8 cycle. So that's the third audience. There's a third audience, and I think it's ironic that we only started talking about this third audience recently, but the third audience are the people who are actually using the operating system. We spend a lot of time thinking about the hardware folks, a lot of time thinking about the application folks, the developers. But I think only recently we've really spent a lot of time focusing, and this is in part due to, I think in part this is part of our own intention, but I think also this is a statement about the maturity of the Linux market in general. Is we're at the point now where we're doing things like shipping web consoles, GUIs, making things easier to use, making first of all, people with mouse and keyboards, right, making GUIs easier to use, but also creating systems to make automation of Linux easier, right? Because it's been a long time since most of our customers have touched a server with a mouse and a keyboard, right? People still do it, but the vast majority of servers out there are being managed not by people, but they're being managed by machines, right? It's automation systems like Ansible and so forth. And so when we talk about simplifying, a lot of what we're simplifying is we're simplifying the act of managing the system, both for humans through things like web consoles and GUIs and things like this, and also simplifying the management through these automation systems. And that's through investments we've made in something we call system roles. So RHEL system roles are this is a fancy word for Ansible modules that we ship with RHEL. And these allow you to perform some like routine system tasks, both for RHEL and for some of our partner applications. So things like SQL Server or SAP. If you use these system roles in order to manage your system, perform these routine tasks, you're insulated from a lot of the complexity of like, so if we were to, for example, do something crazy like change the time system on RHEL, right? You don't have to go back and redo all of your automation because we changed the time system. If you're using a system role, the system role will take care of all those changes and insulate you from all those changes. And so anyway, that was a long answer, but I feel like simplicity in several dimensions is a good way to think about it, because the underlying system is not getting simpler; it's just always getting more complex, right? And so we have to kind of build more sophisticated systems to insulate people from it.
Yeah, and kind of that tees up that those underlying systems. So my background, I'm an infrastructure guy, and I remember if you go back about 10 years ago, it was we're going to go all to white boxes, everything's going to be commoditized. The cloud should look at as this simple plane, and I look at the cloud and I say, if I want to deploy a server in the cloud, I think there's more complexity and options there than if I go to, Dell, HP, Lenovo, choose your server of choice in my data center. There's more options there. I know a lot of work's gone on with ARM. There's new, hardware architectures. So maybe speak a little bit to ARM and some of the other, hardware diversity and what the operating systems had to do to make sure that, Linux everywhere just works.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the core missions of RHEL, right? Is to be available everywhere customers need us to be, right? And so we've always supported multiple microarchitectures, so the x86 folks and Power and Z and so forth. And just in January, we announced that we finally made generally available RHEL for ARM. So now ARM is a first-class citizen, just like all the other microarchitectures. And this was, I mentioned before that this kind of predictability of the hardware market. It used to be you could set your clock, every 18 months, Moore's law, right? Is okay, things are going to double every 18 months.
Tick tock,
right? That is no longer the case. and that's due to lots of things, right? We have new and exciting microarchitectures like ARM. And I know we have other up and comers coming, so RISC-V, people are starting to talk about meaningfully. And we've got also the introduction of accelerators, right? So there's ASICs and FPGAs and GPUs. And So it's interesting watching the hardware market now, because you have the public cloud providers who, it's a commodity market, right? The economics of it's a commodity market, so they need to differentiate their offerings. The way they're going to differentiate their offerings is by having more and more exotic, faster, more interesting hardware. And then on the other side, you have the folks shipping on-premise hardware, and they have to do exactly the same thing, because they have to provide more interesting hardware than what the cloud providers do. So now we've got this kind of self-licking ice cream cone of differentiation, right? It's everyone's kind of, what that ultimately has created is this very fragmented hardware market with like lots of overlapping interdependencies and lots of overlapping schedules, which makes it a really interesting time to be an operating system, because as I mentioned earlier, our whole job is to have to sit on top of all of that complexity and all those interlocking roadmaps and all those schedules, and make sure that the customer still has the experience of being able to use RHEL wherever you need to use RHEL, regardless of whatever chaos is happening underneath. So it's a very
well,
spicy moment.
Gunnar, it's one of those, the customers expect it, but they underappreciate the amount of work that has to go into it. I had Mike Barrett, who runs product management for OpenShift, on 2 shows ago, so a month ago, talking about OpenShift 4.10. And when it came to new support for Azure Stack Hub, and the question I posed to him was, well, we've had RHEL and OpenShift running on Azure for years. Isn't Azure Stack Hub just that Microsoft instantiation in a customer's data center? And Mike was like, well, yeah, it is, but at the operating system level, there are certain bits and configurations and settings that changed. And it's like, oh, it's where the marketing and the engineering reality, it works, but the devil's in the detail, we know. And that's where Red Hat's experience working across all those environments and working closely with the ISV ecosystem. So I guess that sets up for the discussion of this hybrid multi-cloud world. We talk about whatever term customers want to use. The reality is the diversity of applications and of infrastructure that they're doing is even more diverse today, and will continue to be more diverse in the future. So, what does that mean? What's in RHEL 9, and what are the things that your team's looking at to live, thrive, and enable our customers to innovate and take advantage of what's out there?
Yeah, sure. So kind of picking up on some of the breadcrumbs I just left behind, certainly we're going to continue doing the things that RHEL needs to do, which is, again, insulate people from and let them, insulate them from the complexity while still allowing them to take advantage of all of the interesting stuff that this hardware can do. That's kind of job number 1. And job number 2 is to, number 1, create that stability that I talked about for the applications, but also, it's interesting. If you look at the RHEL's something like 10,000 packages now. It's this conglomeration of like 10,000 upstream open source projects. It's crazy the amount of software that it is, right? It no longer fits on a DVD, right? It's that big. But if you look at what an actual what is an operating system?
By the way, for our younger audience, a DVD was an optical disc that we used to use before we had streaming in the cloud and everything like that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I'm an old man. But if you look at these 10,000 packages, only about 300 of them are kind of the operating system proper. And then the question is, why are we shipping the other 9,700 packages? Well, the reason why we're shipping the other 9,700 packages is because over the last 20 years, people have become accustomed to relying on Red Hat and RHEL to provide them with all of the interesting software that they need. And they know that when we ship the software, it's easier for them to get approval for their security, or they know that basically they can trust us to be shipping the software and making sure that it's stable and that we're patching bugs and things like this. And so having taught people that, they keep asking us to ship more stuff, right? And so the natural progression of RHEL is just to keep adding more packages, and more packages. That's fine as far as it goes. And it's work that we're happy to do. But it's also true that with all of this change and with all of the options available, you have some people who want to be using, say, Python 3, and some people who want to be using, say, Python 2. And they need to be able to do that on the same on the same system. Well, one of the things that we provide in RHEL is something we call application streams. And so this is the ability to basically pin yourself on a particular version of a particular runtime, particular framework. And so you can actually have a Python 2 and a Python 3 developer kind of peacefully coexisting on the same operating system. And in this way, again, simplification. In this way, we're able to let people take advantage of almost like RHEL as a supply chain, right? And give people as many options as possible without sacrificing the stability that we've got. So if you want to go move more quickly with something like Ruby or Python or something like that, you can go use those application streams. If you want kind of a 10-year promise and a 13-year commitment on something that is super stable, then you have that option as well. And so, in this way, we're RHEL is first an operating system, but second, it's also a library of dependencies that people can use in their own shop.
Yeah, it's great. There's some good resonance in the chat about the ARM processor. Eighth Doctor, who was asking, I think he's looking for, would love to have a inexpensive ARM platform to be able to do, I'm guessing, test dev, home lab type of environment. Yeah. Anything you've been hearing from the team as to what ways to do that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't sell ARM hardware.
Right. No, we don't sell any hardware.
But what I can recommend, though, in order to make the whole operation less expensive, is this is a good plug for our developer program. So with the Red Hat developer program, developer for individuals, we call it inside, you can go sign up for the developer program. We just expanded that so that you can get everything for development purposes, but it also gives you permission to go run RHEL in production on up to 16 systems. And so this was designed specifically for people who have the same pathology I do and like to run their own email servers in their basement. This subscription is designed for you. So if you want to run your own home lab, if you want to run your own mail server in a basement, you can do that with the Red Hat developer subscription. And with that, it should give you access to, you can use whatever ARM hardware you like. Now, I should say, though, that the ARM hardware that we support right now we're pretty focused on the server-ready hardware. Can I take a digression on the weirdness of the ARM ecosystem? Okay, all right. Here we go. Okay, ARM. So Intel, AMD, the x86 world. Super predictable, right? You have one company that is basically making these things, and all these motherboards look the same. All the systems look more or less the same, and so so relatively predictable, relatively stable. ARM, super innovative, moving quickly, lots of different providers, and so you have all different systems on chip. You have all these different SoCs floating around. Each of them have to get enabled separately. Unlike the x86 ecosystem, where if we've got one version of a chip, we can kind of enable that and everything more or less works. But each of these SoCs have to get enabled separately. And so creating and encouraging more consistency in the ARM ecosystem is something that's pretty important to us. So the ARM folks have set up a program for this. It's called the System Ready program. And so there are system server ready. And so RHEL works on that hardware. There are other classes of this program, and I'm going to forget what the actual acronyms mean, but it's basically for different classes of hardware. They have different ways of describing the consistency. So we're focused on the ARM server class hardware right now, and especially as we start making investments in Edge, we're going to be working our way down that list of programs again. To make sure that we can take advantage of all the interesting stuff that the ARM Edge hardware is doing. There's every reason to believe that RHEL can go enable those use cases as well.
I'm not sure if you can answer this, but there's a question in the chat about CentOS 9 stream, and it looks like they're looking for. We've got it up on the screen there. Desktop packages to help them because right now they have to wait for the GA release. So
I think let me read this. Sorry, we're going to how to get the Enterprise Linux 9 ecosystem vendors to release desktop packages for CS9 before RHEL 9. Oh yeah, okay. So people can target CentOS Stream. People can certainly target CentOS Stream 9. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about EPEL. Enterprise extra packages for Enterprise Linux, I think is what it stands for. EPEL. We just call it EPEL. So this is a kind of sidecar project that allows you to people can build packages that Red Hat won't ship. You can build those separately and put them on EPEL. And if you subscribe your RHEL system to these EPEL repositories, you can go get those extra packages. So it's a way for people to extend the RHEL ecosystem without waiting for Red Hat to ship software. So if you think about how the development of RHEL works, we start with Fedora, and then we move into CentOS Stream, and things cook in CentOS Stream. When you're looking at CentOS Stream today, you are looking at the development of the actual RHEL. These are Red Hat engineers working on RHEL. And so if you are targeting a package, if you're targeting an application for something like RHEL 9, you can follow the development of CentOS Stream 9 and know that as we get closer and closer to GA, you're getting closer and closer to what RHEL 9 is eventually going to ship and look like. Anyway, which is to say, if now we have, so the question is about how do we get ecosystem vendors to release desktop packages in CS9 before RHEL 9? This is exactly what we would like people to be doing. So if you are building desktop applications for RHEL 9, and you're an ISV who's, I don't want to pick one out by name, but just Firefox, let's say, just as an example. If I'm building Firefox and I want to target it for RHEL 9, you should be able to build your Firefox against CentOS Stream 9. And if you are following CentOS Stream 9 through the lifetime, by the time we get to RHEL 9 GA, you'll be ready. You'll be, and this is exactly what the CentOS Stream system was designed to enable, so that you don't have to wait for like a RHEL 9 alpha or a RHEL 9 beta before you can do your work. You can just follow us the whole way through.
All right. Gunnar, one of the other topics we haven't touched on yet is security. So is there anything new in RHEL 9? You know, when I think about the whole space, the surface area of attack is so much larger. You talk about the diversity of hardware, I'm sure has challenges. Going to the public cloud, going to the edge, all have unique issues. We're spending lots of time on the secure supply chain as Red Hat as an overall. I've got some people on my team working on that. So yeah, boil down all the security challenges and tell us what's happening there.
Yeah. So the good news is that with RHEL 9, we figured security, we're done. So there's nothing new on security in RHEL 9.
I'm not going to let legal watch this. So just please go on.
No, with every release, we obviously take security very seriously. It's one of the things customers expect from us, and so we made several investments. And sometimes I could talk about new security features, of which we have several. But maybe one of the most important things we're doing is actually taking things out in order to make RHEL 9 more secure. So, for example, you should see us deprecating outdated cryptographic algorithms, right? So there are some hashing algorithms which have been discouraged for years now, and part of our job is to make sure that we're not accidentally using any of those discouraged hashing algorithms, because we don't want people thinking that they're secure when they're not in fact secure, because their cryptography is broken. So we've taken we've deprecated some additional cryptographic algorithms. You'll see us rebuilding on OpenSSL 3, for example. Lots of individual security related packages have obviously been updated and rebased in order to for the RHEL 9 release. One of my favorite projects, back before I was on the product side at RHEL, I was in the public sector for Red Hat. I was working with the federal government and state and local governments and things like this. And one of my favorite projects was a thing called SCAP, the Secure Content Automation Protocol. So this is a way of describing a security posture and ensuring that your system matches that security posture. So in other words, if you have a set of rules around the federal desktop computing standards, for example, you could put those rules in machine readable form and then run a program on your system, and the system would self-report like, yes, I comply with this standard. This is useful for both an individual server, but also useful to be able to do across many systems at the same time, right? If you've got a whole fleet of systems that need to be HIPAA compliant or compliant with like PCI DSS or what have you. And so with RHEL, we actually ship with guidance on things like HIPAA and PCI DSS. That's built in. So each of your RHEL systems can now, each of your RHEL 9 systems, they can self-report on their compliance with particular standards. So I always enjoy stuff like that. We've also changed several defaults because one of the most important things with security is making sensible choices from the outset. And so we've with a major release of the operating system, it's a chance to change default system behaviors without screwing people up too much. And so we've used the opportunity of a major release to change some of the system defaults and some of the settings so that out of the box, RHEL will be more secure and prevent things like brute force attacks and so forth.
So this show is in the clouds, Gunnar. How about, what's happening in the public cloud? How many years ago, what was there, the, just enough operating system movement, I'm not going to need to think about it. Heck, Red Hat acquired CoreOS, whose original, business model was, it's going to be just like Chrome, automatic update. I don't need to think about it under there. So give us the overall Linux in the cloud, where RHEL fits, how customers think about, that type of solution.
Yeah. So I think the, number one, especially for customers who already have an infrastructure, right? What was true before clouds existed, which is that, especially when you're talking about an operating system, consistency, and we talked about simplicity at the top of the show, simplicity and complexity and making sure that your operations are efficient and well audited and all these other things, these are all still important. And that's true whether you're managing multiple data centers or if you're managing data centers and a cloud. And so, but when I talk to customers, what I find is that they are happiest when they have made a single operating system choice that they can then exercise on all the different clouds and all the different infrastructures that they need to run. And by the way, nowadays it's not even just a data center and a public cloud; it's also data center, public cloud, and deployments out to the edge, right? And if you can have the same operating system that is able to host applications on all of those infrastructures, then you've got a chance to you only have to train your operators once. You only have to train your developers once. Everyone's kind of swimming in the same pool. So that's kind of takeaway number one. Now that said, public clouds are unique in the sense that they are elastic and you can spin things up and shut things down very quickly. And so when we build RHEL for the public clouds, we have to optimize for different things. First of all, the hardware is weirder, like we talked about. The hardware is unique, and so we need to make sure we're optimizing for the novel hardware that's up there. But we also need to optimize for things like boot time, right? In a data center, you're not so much worried about boot time. On the public cloud, you are extremely worried about boot time, right? Because that affects the responsiveness and the response time of your applications. I think you mentioned the just enough OS. There's a drive to also make things significantly smaller, and I think there is, and so minimization is certainly a theme that we're working on for RHEL in general, and then specifically on RHEL 9, making it easier to make RHEL composable. That is not just to. It shouldn't be the easiest thing should not be to go install all 10,000 packages of RHEL. The easiest thing should be to use tools like Image Builder, which is an online service that we've got, and also an on-premise application, using tools like Image Builder to let people compose an operating system that they need for that specific workload on that specific provider. So I should be able to say, I'm going to do XYZ on my system. I need thus and such packages, and it goes here on Amazon or goes here on Azure. And so integrating the deployment of an operating system or kind of a gold image into the cloud and just making that kind of a natural thing, that's pretty important to us now in a way that it wasn't before. Yeah, I think so. It's the cloud on the surface, it feels extremely different, but it turns out that a lot of the optimizations and a lot of the things that we're doing to make the cloud easier to use, perform better, these all have dividends for the on-premise work as well. It turns out that it's actually not so different after all.
Yeah, and Gunnar, you teed up, not only is it my data center, maybe some hosted environment, the public cloud, but if the edge is part of my environment, what's going to be running on the edge? I'm sure thinking it's going to be Linux for like pretty much everything, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and so these edge deployments are really interesting use cases, right? Because they exercise all these themes that I've been talking about. The hardware, pretty unique hardware. Like it's a totally different kind of hardware situation. The way that you build applications is often different because the way that you're managing the applications is different. Because if something goes wrong with your edge application, you can't send somebody on a truck to go visit 10,000 installations to go fix it, right? That's
Gunnar, my last episode, we talked about running Kubernetes on the ISS. So,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
having the
Right.
sysadmin, while they'd love to be able to hop on the rocket and go on there and help out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And so, some of the things are the same, right? All that simplicity, that consistency across the platforms, that becomes really important. The way that you manage the application becomes very different because, like in the ISS, if you're going to go do a system update, it better work. And if it doesn't work, you better have a way of coming back and recovering. And that's true whether you're in a space station or you're on a telephone pole. And so, some of the investments that we're making on the edge is, yes, expanding the kind of hardware that we're going to support with RHEL, but also giving people the tools they need in order to manage both their Linux hosts and the applications that ride on top, and do so in a kind of a way that is natural for the edge deployments. And so, using technology that we got from CoreOS, right, which you mentioned earlier, using methods like a RPM OS tree. So RPM OS tree allows you to create kind of one atomic image of your operating system, deploy it into a place, and then when you have an update to do, it knows to go update the whole thing at once or roll it back. And then you need to be able to do all of those updates in kind of low bandwidth or highly latent networks. So we have to make concessions for that. But again, just like I talked about for public cloud, all this stuff that I'm talking about doing for the edge, I have every expectation that people are going to be able to take advantage of all of this back in their own data centers and in the public cloud, right? Because people care about bandwidth, people care about latency, people care about atomic updates, people care about being able to roll back. So all the stuff that we do on the edge has dividends for the other platforms as well. And so this just reinforces for me the importance of RHEL's kind of central role in creating a consistent technology and kind of operational experience across all these topologies, right?
Yeah, and Gunnar, there's a note that came in the chat that I'm sure you can speak to, because it's not only in the public cloud, but even in the data center. Oftentimes, the default is, well, there's a free option out there. I know if I go build an AMI, in Amazon, that Amazon Linux looks good, Ubuntu's there, I need to scroll down a little bit and say, oh, wait, I need to pay for this RHEL. So I usually see it as more of an and story. There's certain environments that, I'm going to use free stuff, and there's there. So maybe you can speak to how customers see that and how they, when are they like, I know Red Hat, I trust Red Hat, those sorts. We talked about the enterprise life cycle before. So they're all things that pay into the, free versus paid.
Yeah, no, free operating systems are great. We have several of them inside Red Hat, right? It's the and there is no. I don't see it as a tension between the free and the paid. It is, like you said, it's just like there are different use cases. People need different stuff. If you need to take an application, deploy it on an extremely predictable environment, and have it behave basically the same for like 13, 15 years, then you probably need a paid operating system. If you have an operating system where you have an application that's constantly changing and constantly churning, and you're not going to need help with anything, and you don't particularly care about security, and you don't particularly care about your ecosystem or hardware partner vendor or hardware software partners, cool. You can go use a free operating system. That's fine. The free operating systems play an important role in the ecosystem, and they're part of the success of Linux overall, right? Just like the paid Linuxes also fulfill an important role in the ecosystem. And I would argue that one cannot exist without the other. Like all of us are working on, we're competing in the market and things like this. But in terms of the Linux project overall of making all of this technology as available as possible, all of us are playing an important role in that.
Awesome. Well said, Gunnar. All right. So I got one fun question for you before we wrap. Star Wars going on. You a fan? Do you have a favorite movie, favorite character, anything like that?
It was funny. I recently started watching. I recently went back to rewatch them in anticipation of showing them to my son, and who is now 8 years old, and so he's probably more than ready to watch it.
Yeah. What order do you show them in? That's a really, important parenting decision.
Yeah. So for me, he was going to experience it in the same order I did. So it's going to be New Hope, right? So we started on 4. I watched the first 10 minutes and I didn't remember it being that violent. I was like, you got Darth Vader throwing people all over the place. I was like, I don't remember this. I saw this when I was 3. How could it be? Anyway, so it'll be a minute before he before he watches Star Wars, I'm afraid. But
Yeah, I dove right in. I did it the same way. I watched it. I had my kids. We watched the original trilogy, then the prequels, and they were old enough to see the sequels, and they came out. Awesome. So hey, tomorrow, congratulations, 20th anniversary of RHEL. That's super exciting. And we at Red Hat next week have Summit, so you and I will both be in Boston. Any quick shout outs you want people to, of course, check out the RHEL sessions, check out everything we're doing,
yeah.
but.
Obviously. So first of all, the onstage, the demos are always a fireworks event. Those are always, I'm always delighted by those. I'm doing a session on the future of the operating system, where I'm going to go deeper on some of the things that we talked about today. But really, make yourself available for all of the content. I mean, I think there's something like 30 sessions on RHEL and all its different flavors and aspects. So please enjoy an avalanche of RHEL information next week.
Yeah, and for those that aren't coming to Boston, which it is a pretty small event, if you just go to redhat.com/summit, you can still sign up for the virtual. Lots of, you've got access to all the content. It's free to register, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. So, all right, I was just looking to see if there are any questions. Right, Shantanu, I understand. Maybe the sequels, we shall not refer to them as there. I was just seeing if there was any other specific questions. There's one here. A question I'd have is how do you define the value of Red Hat subscriptions? Let me put it up on screen there for you.
Sure.
Is it relationship? Is it maintenance? Is it something else? I guess a good final question to kind of, why RHEL in 2022?
Yeah. Okay, so let me see if this should be rifle training for me and everybody that works for me. So let's see how well I do. Okay, so ultimately the value of RHEL is specifically a lot of people think about it as, okay, it's a hardened set of bits and it's a phone number that you can call, and that's true. That is certainly that may be the core of the subscription value. One part of the subscription value, though, is the extensive relationship we have with other partners, other organizations, in order to, number one, make sure that security vulnerabilities are fixed promptly. That requires, if you are relying simply on the upstream communities to fix your security problems, what you're doing is forcing yourself to upgrade to the latest version in order to follow a thing. And that may come with new bugs and new features that you were not planning on. And so one of the things that you get with a RHEL subscription is the ability to separate these two things, so you can have security fixes without being forced to upgrade, right? So that's pretty important if you're interested in stability and not being surprised. Part of those relationships also is the relationships we have with the hardware and the software vendors to ensure that new hardware that's coming out can be supported alongside all the hardware that you've already got, to ensure that your application, it remains stable for a very long time. That requires real work. That doesn't happen by accident. And it requires people to be on the phone with each other and to be in meetings with each other and trading roadmaps and working on bugs together. So that's part of the value as well. Increasingly, you're going to see us adding services, literally services, online services that are part of the subscription. So if you don't know about Insights, for example, you should go take a look at Insights. Coming up soon, you're going to see us adding things like malware detection. You're going to see us adding things like cost management tools to help you kind of right size your public cloud spending. All these tools exist in console.redhat.com. So when you have a subscription, you have a Red Hat robot that's going to be there to tell you, like, hey, you might have this thing misconfigured, or hey, you think you might have these vulnerabilities that you haven't looked at. Having those kinds of coaching or advisory opportunities, I think that increasingly that's kind of a core part of the subscription experience. For time, I'll stop there, but I have an entire hour talk on the value of the subscription, so I could go on forever. But
yeah, no, Gunnar, really, really good points. Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you and many others in Boston. Thank you so much for joining. Congrats again on the 20 years, and thanks so much to the audience for watching us. We'll be back every 2 weeks here. If you have topics, guests that you think we should be watching, feel free to reach out. I'm just at Stu on Twitter. I'm Stu at redhat.com for the email. Gunnar, thanks so much for joining us. And, be sure to tune in next week for Red Hat Summit, live and virtually from Boston. So until next time, Thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.